now. So, okay, the first thing is a lot of people have asked kind of like what diet is right for them. They're hearing a lot about keto, about, macro counting, about paleo, all that stuff. So everyone's different. So it's kind of hard to answer that question. So instead of answering that question with which one's right for you, I'd have to know a lot about you before I can answer that question. So before I do that, I'm just going to give you like my really quick takes on the ones that I've mentioned. So we'll start with paleo. I always recommend paleo food to anyone that asks. Basically, what paleo food is, it's just working on the quality of food you take. So it's all the natural foods, one ingredient foods. So meat, vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, things like that would be all fall under the paleo category. If you're not sure if what you're eating is paleo or not, it's probably not. So if it's, if you're buying something in a package, it's probably not paleo. The paleo stuff is usually just that one ingredient. Another thing about paleo is it is no wheat, no gluten, no dairy. There is a little bit of leeway in the paleo community with dairy. That's a little bit of a gray area, but generally speaking, if you're going to go really full-blown paleo, then we would stay away from dairy. I would always recommend, if you've never done something like that before, if you've never tried something like that before, I would definitely recommend you try it at least once for 28 days and see what happens when you reintroduce any of those foods that are not allowed. What I found was I felt really, really crappy after I went for 30 days for the first time, full-blown paleo. And then I tried eating, things like dairy or things like grains after that. So that was one thing. And I always say you can always like mix things like keto or macro counting with paleo. But paleo for us is kind of like the standard foundation of what kind of foods you should be eating on a regular basis. So that's kind of my take on that, and that's what we tend to recommend at CFW. The diet that I would say is right for you is the one that you can stick to and get good results on. And I know that sounds like super obvious, but it's very true. If you can sustain it for most of the year, and if you're happy with how it makes you feel, how it makes you look, how it makes you perform, then all of that is probably a good sign that you have it right. So that would be the big takeaway, I would say, from all of this. So some of the other FAQs that I've been getting is a lot of times people ask me about carbs, like, are carbs bad for you? And carbs are not necessarily bad for you. Sugar is something I would avoid. And carbs technically are sugar. At the end of the day, they get processed in a somewhat similar way through your body. But the problem with carbs, and the reason why when people cut down carbs, they tend to lose weight, is because they're extremely easy to overeat. Like, it's really easy if you imagine like a bag of chips or like a box of cookies. It's really easy to overeat those types of items. Even things like rice, I find I can easily eat a bowl of rice, and it's a ridiculously high amount of carbs that you're taking in all at once. Where other foods that are a little bit more satiating are a lot harder to overconsume, such as like, chicken breast or something like, most types of meat. You don't really hear too many people like overeating chicken breast. Like, you don't show up the next day like, oh man, I had so many chicken breasts last night. But it's very easy for people to be like, yeah, I ate an entire bag of chips last night. So we kind of, one huge part of eating paleo foods is they are harder to overconsume. Even something like apples, like it's not often you hear people like, oh man, I ate like a bag of apples last night. Like, usually you eat one and you're like, yeah, I'm good. Like, that was great. I enjoyed it. I don't really feel like eating another apple. So when you're eating these like nutrient real foods, these nutrient dense real foods, you don't tend to want to overeat them because your brain has it just comes in a natural way that it shuts it basically going for you. The next thing that I want you guys to think about for this is I want you to visually portion control what you think would make you feel content for so hours until your next meal. So if you know your first meal's at 8, your next meal's at like, call it 12. If it's 8 in the morning and then 12 noon is lunch, just eat enough food for you to think like, yeah, this should make me content until I get to lunch. And you don't want to ever like walk away from a meal like super full, like you can barely walk. I know I do that every time I go get like sushi, and it's not the best practice. But so I would say like just kind of visually control it so you think that it'll be the right amount of food for you. When lunch comes around, you'll start getting hungry and you'll have an appetite and you'll be good to go. If you overshoot it, like if you're still full by the time lunch comes, still eat lunch, but just have a small lunch. If you undershoot it and you're really hungry, like an hour before you're supposed to eat, maybe eat a little bit early and eat a little bit more. So you're just going to play with it. As you get more comfortable with it, you'll start figuring it out. You're going to notice here every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, we're taking a weight measurement. So I don't like when people obsess over the scale. So only measure yourself those 3 days and don't worry so much about the number. It's just one tool. It's not everything. So I don't want you guys to obsess over that, but just have it as a metric, just one metric. Lots of times people do these challenges and their weight doesn't really move, but their inches go down a lot, which is like ideal for health goals.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
It's Sandy.
Oh, hey, Sandy.
I don't know if I may be the only person here, but for those who are vegetarian or vegan, and you can tell me something later if doesn't apply to anybody else, but is there any, the paleo is pretty meat heavy. So,
yeah. So with vegetarians and vegans, actually, Jess has a big smile on her face right now. So Jess dabbled in the whole vegetarian thing for a little while, Coach Jess. So she might have some input after I'm done here. But for myself, I always recommend people to try to stick to real food as much as possible. So the problem with a lot of the vegetarian diets that I see is they're either really high carb and like low quality protein, which could be a little bit of a recipe for disaster, especially when trying to recover from workouts. So the first thing for a vegetarian that I would look into, and did you say vegan or vegetarian, Sandy?
Both.
Both. Okay. So like it's obviously a little bit harder for the vegans because the vegetarians can get like eggs or things like that, which is a great protein source. But what I would do is I would look into supplementing like really highly concentrated protein sources. So you can go to any, like a Fiddleheads or something like that. You can talk to them about it and tell them that you're kind of worried about, not getting enough protein on the vegetarian diet, and they'll be able to help you out with that. I find their staff is very helpful over there. So that would be the first thing to say. The next thing is just check your B vitamins. That's something that you need to be very careful about. That's very easy to be under nourished on when you go into a vegan vegetarian thing. So there's those two things, and be careful with the thing that kind of, like all the Beyond Meat stuff. Like, I just don't think it's healthy for you. It's all like, it's just all chemicals essentially. So, in my opinion, like it's all made in a lab, and it's just not the most healthy thing for you. So, I would still try to stick to as much real and whole food as possible. And you might have to experiment, Sandy, with different things to see like how they affect you, how certain grains might or might not affect you. But there's definitely there's definitely ways around it. It just takes a little bit more work. And if you can squeeze in the odd, fish or the odd eggs or things like that, that would be really, really beneficial. I'm actually gonna, Jess, how did I do on that one? Because you experimented for a little while with the vegetarian diet.
Hey guys. Yeah, we were vegetarians for about a year, a couple years ago. And if it's something you've considered, I would always say try it. Definitely make sure you do your research. I think Chris's advice about supplementation is really good. Vitamin B especially, but even things like zinc, it's really easy to run low of. And I think that you can get a lot of small amounts of vitamins and minerals in your day and not really be keeping track of them. And so then it's not like you're taking a supplement and you took it out when you went vegetarian. You just might not be getting sources that you didn't even realize you were getting. We did it for a year, like I said, which I felt like was a long enough time to really get a handle on how we felt. I would say that I lost weight and I lost some fat, but my performance suffered in every way, and I didn't feel as good as I usually do. And so at the end of the time period, we decided that Jeff, my husband Jeff, felt the same way. And we decided that we felt like our bodies functioned better and thrived better on a diet, a meat or a paleo based diet.
Is there, I mean, there's two parts for the challenge. Is it okay to, if you're not a meat eater, and is there such thing as a veggie or vegan paleo?
Yeah, so it's totally okay if you're not a meat eater. Like we want to make these things like, when in my in the description of what for nutrition, it just says to have 3 healthy meals a day. And I strongly recommend paleo for the sake of having quality foods in your body. But whatever is healthy, or whatever you think is healthy, is a start point, and the goal of the challenge is just to improve on it. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sandy, but it's totally okay. And it's all about just improving what you're doing now. And I would definitely look into if potentially you might be missing something, because I've worked with a lot of vegan athletes over the years, and I have a lot of experience with working with them. And lots of times, I do find that it's really easy to under eat proteins, and it's really hard in some cases to bring their performance up to that standard.
Okay.
Not impossible though. It just takes a little bit more work.